Welcome to the program. Today we talk about aging. Now, a couple of episodes ago, we had Tina Woods on to talk about the geopolitical aspects of this, the economic aspects of this, an aging planet, really, with most countries in the world going through this significant moment where there are far more seniors than there are young people to support them, take care of them, and replace their working roles in society. Well, today we're going to take it from a different angle. And Nick Palmarini is here to help us do that. He's joining us from the United Kingdom, where he's the director for their National Innovation Center for Aging, a world leading organization supported by the UK government and Newcastle University. Their mission is to add intelligence to aging and longevity by connecting and interpreting the personal, social, environmental, and economic dimensions that underpin different stages of life. He is an author, he is a teacher, an applied research scientist, and a man with an interest in serving and to determine how technologies, including emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, can help mitigate the factors of aging, like loneliness and isolation, for example. How they can fight ageism, a topic upon which he has given a TEDx talk that will include as a link in the description of this podcast, and to support the life of older adults while preserving their independence and dignity. We spent a good deal of time in our conversation talking about all of the different elements of aging, but we spent a good chunk of that time specifically on the topic of discrimination, on the topic of loneliness and isolation, on the topic of prevention, preventing or putting off major health issues until later in the aging process. And the entire theme here is about innovation. How can we innovate? How can our societies and governments and charities innovate to support healthy aging? There is a big difference between talking about an aging population, people literally getting older by the numbers. But what does it mean to have a society that's aging in a healthy way, with people living longer, more productive lives, where they reach their 60s, 70s, and 80s and are still able to do most of the things they were able to do in their 20s, 30s, and 40s? That is a very different society than one where people turn 50 and immediately start suffering significant health issues. And as we talked about, issues of loneliness, isolation, and falling behind, the feeling of falling behind. And we also spent a good deal of time talking about the very real ageism that exists in our economy today and the harms that it is doing to not just people who are aging, but the harms it's doing to all of us and the missed opportunities to bring that experience and that mentorship and knowledge to the younger generations who are feeling more and more pressure to pick up the slack as our population of retirees begins to grow. So it's a very important topic, and the reason that I really wanted to bring this to our program, to the community of curious minds, is that of all of the trends that we talk about on this show, and all of those that we have yet to cover, this is one we're all going to face. This one is happening in real time, and as Nick talks about in the interview, we are all aging. You and I are a day older than we were yesterday. We're a year older than we were last year. For those who are old enough, we're a decade older than we were a decade ago. We are different people, and we're going through an aging process ourselves. And so, just because you might be listening to this program in your 20s, 30s, or 40s, and you don't really think of yourself as being affected by this, I invite you to listen to this interview and listen carefully, because there's a lot of things happening in our lives right now that our society isn't supporting us with, isn't helping us with. And the challenges we face today are not the same that we faced in the past, and yet the opportunity for innovation is so much greater than it ever was before. And people like Nick are out there trying to help bring that innovation to this very real problem of supporting a healthy aging population. Nick was generous with his time, and he sat for almost an hour for this conversation, and it is my pleasure to bring that to you now. Okay, Nick, welcome to the program.
Hey, Brian, thanks for having me.
So we just did an introduction for you as the director of the UK National Innovation Center for Aging, but nobody can introduce themselves quite like themselves and the mission of the organizations that they lead. So I'd love to give you a couple minutes here at the top to talk about the center and what you all focus on and what your missions and purposes are.
Thank you, Brian. So I'm Nick Palmarini, as you say, the director of the UK National Innovation Center for Aging. We're based at the northeast of England. I suppose that we're being based here by the UK government, which is the founder and the funding entity of the center, probably to avoid all the magnet south of England, which is attracting a lot of businesses. So I think that's an interesting chance not to be, let me say, on one hand in the mainstream of London, which gives us, I think, the freedom to more or less explore from a broader perspective the topic of aging. I think the key word in our title is the word innovation. We're funded not by the Ministry of Health, we're funded by the Ministry of Innovation, meaning that the government itself wanted to put a heavy weight on what are the innovative plays around the topic of aging, which is something that I think we all realize, I'd say now more than ever, that it was missing, that it's missing, because there's many innovations happening around us from several perspectives, but obviously technology played a huge role in the innovation landscape. That we think it's time that we push forward because people is getting older. There is a huge demographic, I would say, is movement happening right now. The perspective of having 2 billions of people over 60 in this planet by 2050, I think, gives us the magnitude of why innovation is needed. And it's needed for the not only the old people, but for us in the process of getting old, meaning that there is a lot that we have to do in somehow preventing what could be potential causes or diseases that could happen in later life. Hence, the word prevention, it's a key element of our strategy and approach, because we think we can really help us living healthier, longer lives if we don't only intervene at the end of this process, but moreover in the flow of life, which opens the door to the, let me say, connected words around what we do, which is longevity. We should have to start looking as a keyword, because it's not only the fact that people is getting older, it's people living older as well, it's living longer as well, meaning that there's a lot that we should have to understand on what's going to be the landscape that we have ahead of us. So the innovation that we propose is exploring what are the key trends that are happening, and there is one mega trends that is happening at the same time as aging, which is climate change, and we're heavily focusing some of our initiatives in understanding how climate change and aging are so strongly correlated one to each other. When we started operation 4 years ago, we framed a strategy called aging intelligence. The intelligence that we want to promote is made by two components, let me say two sides of the apple of this intelligence. On one hand, we have the intelligence of people, us as humans, in the process of aging. We need to involve not only listening, but also engaging in the terms of designing that innovation I was meaning before, the people. It's ourselves. We're becoming expert and wiser in our process of aging. I would say expert and wiser are two different things. We're not only old and wise, we're also old and expert. Meaning that if you combine these two elements and harness this intelligence, which typically is sparked when someone theoretically retires, it's where we think there could be a huge capital that we can leverage and bring it back to, let me say, the frame of innovation I was discussing before. The other side of the intelligence is the intelligence that we as humans are producing in the innovation, in the technology, in the business models, in the way on how we are creating and developing our own world today. If you combine these two intelligences, that's what aging intelligence is. And it's the, let me say, the mainstream that we're bringing forward for the last 4 years. It is helping us to scout what it's relevant, and not only it's relevant for the, let me say, for the market. It's relevant mainly and first for the people.
So, what is the most important either trend or aspect of aging that you think that whether it's the Western world or the entire world is getting wrong?
Well, I think it's first of all missing one key point. We have no experience of getting old. You and me probably share the same experience of the first day of school, but we have no idea about what's going to be our future, or probably we have an idea about who is going to be in the future, reflecting the experience of our parents or grandparents. So we have that kind of I would say is bias, if you want, perception about what is old age, because it's related to a few experiences of the people nearby us, um, that somehow are suggesting what it could be. But it's always an observation of something that you tend to avoid, thinking that you will never be that way. If you think when you were young, you probably were saying, "Oh, I will never be like that old man." What is changed, for example, now is that we are seeing a young people telling, "Oh, I don't want to be treated like that old man." Meaning that there's a lot that we need and must do in understanding better who are the older adults and who are we in the process of becoming older adults. There are two factors happening at the same time. Uh, we're getting older, so dynamically we're changing. You and me obviously are aging while we're talking, and there's something happening to our understanding experience, also biological. There's something happening exactly right now, so we're constantly changing, and in the meantime society changing around us. It's so silly to keep on, relying ourselves as an older adult, thinking that the world is the same world that we were older adults 20 or 10 years ago. We as older adults, in this stage of our society and life, are experience the knowledge of how many changes are happening to society that we were not aware before. Technology in this case played a huge role in our transformation as humans in the progress of society. What I'm trying to say is that there's this dynamic blob that is moving forward, that we still are framing in a very traditional way, thinking that oh, older adults should be that way, would need those things. Just like everyone is experiencing the same thing at the same time in the same geo-cultural differences, um, again, experiences, landscape, exposure to pollution are making us different. So the fact that we're aging as individuals is something that still we think it's not much explored. That's exactly what we try to do at the center, understanding more the why, the how, instead of the bare what that is typically the focus of who develop innovation for aging.
So you've got to be one of the world's foremost experts on aging. But when I talk to people about this topic, aging means something different to everybody. Some people think aging means, oh, you are in your 80s. You have at the high end. But I think we would understand it to be very different. I mean, somebody aging into their 50s has challenges that they didn't have in their 40s. Somebody in their early 60s has challenges they didn't have in their 50s. How do you break that down when you think about the groups that you're researching? Do you think about aging in stages? Is there a critical moment in your aging when issues start to emerge that wouldn't have previously? And then is there a magic age within our culture where you reach a certain point and now society starts to view you differently?
I think that whoever is telling you there is a magic formula, a number, or whatsoever, is selling you a lie. I think it's, and again, we need dogmas in this society. So we need some kind of references, the 15-minute cities, the blue zones. We need these kind of things, and we all believe, oh, that's the secret. Honestly, it's wrong, because again, we're different. As you said so well, age or aging means so many different things to ourselves. Um, the age per se is one of the elements you should consider when you consider aging. Let me tell you an example. For example, companies in the consumer electronics market or in the consumer goods are framing their aging demographic like a big 65 plus as a one thing. If we believe what the European Society of Gerontology says, that 75, it's now the old age, as before it was 65, and it is from an experiential point of view, and it's a biological point of view. You see how already we should have to at least move that plus to 75, meaning that you have a 55, you have a 65, you have a 75, at least as a three decades, where you can somehow frame three different, very different type of approach to aging and very different stages of your life. But if you're aging in New Delhi, or you're aging in Anchorage, or you're aging in Paris, is again very different. And then what's your background to your 55 or 65 or 75? Are you still married, divorced? Do you have children? You don't. Do you still practice something? Are you working? All these kind of factors are us as humans. And I think it's something that we should have to start thinking. There is not a magic number. There is not a specific moment in life in which you realize that is going to happen. Or better, we could say is that we tend to avoid thinking that we're going to age until something happens and you realize, oh, I feel old. But that I feel old could be literally physical or could be societal. Both of them are detrimental depending on what type of disease you get or how much is being badly treated by someone else. And that's where again the need of innovation, I think it's raising up from every single aspect. So I would say is there are so many different nuances that somehow has been trapped in the concept of generations. The concept of generation is pretty young. It's something that has been framed as we know it today in the 90s. It was very helpful to somehow develop a narrative about the different stages of your life. But then if you think that we're literally putting together boomers in the frame for 1946 1964 as a unique entity that should have more or less the same experience, you already realize how wrong is the concept of generations. And that's something that I think we should also have to overcome. I guess we need an interactions between the generations, which happens naturally. And for sure, there will be, conflict between people and stages of life anyway. But it doesn't mean that we should have to keep on framing ourselves in those boxes, because those boxes somehow are avoiding us to, let me say, progress in an idea of what is inside those boxes that matters, and not the fact that you, since you're in the time brackets, you should be all the same.
You mentioned something earlier that I think is a really important item we should explore, which is the intersection of climate change and an aging planet. Let's dig into that a little bit. I'm sure you've done a ton of research on this. Uh, Give us the outlines of some of the things we should be paying attention to as these two trends converge.
Yeah, I think it's something, again, we should have to look as one thing. There's a lot of, if you think about publicity, but also I would say economically interesting narrative around the net zero, or fighting climate change uh, as it was a mission per se. I always used to say, net zero for what? Who's going to benefit of net zero? It's ourselves. I mean, we have the brain that help us to process that. If we don't have a clean, good planet where to live in, we probably will disappear from the face of the earth. Hence, we won't enjoy whatever net zero achievement that we will be able to get. Right. So, what I'm trying to say is that the climate change is something happening to all of us, but it's strongly related to the fact that a good climate, a good planet, can only be enjoyed by us as humans. Yes, all the animals as well, but we have the consciousness to realize that it's there. At the same time, the process of aging is strongly affected by where you live. Literally, we have the postcode of aging. So literally, you can literally age in a different way from where you were born, from where your mother was living, from all the stages of your life that you spent in a place or in another, which are influencing your process of aging from many perspectives. Where climate change is one, but education is another. If you are born in a neighborhood which is rich enough to allow you to get a good education, you have a strong, higher probability to live for longer and healthier than someone that didn't have the same chance. There are some studies quite solid at the moment that suggest you could have a 10 to 12 years in difference in life expectancy between someone who has a high school degrees or university degrees and someone who has middle school, which tells you a lot about the environment also where you were grown up. And if you see from this perspective, it's where we think we should have to start seeing these two global mega trends happening to us in this historical moment as one thing. There is a theory, it's called the theory of the exposome, and it started to investigate in the holistic dimension of the process of life from all the perspective that somehow you can envision when you see the planet and you see as the climate where you're gonna live and your life and you in the process of aging. That's why it's so important that we started to push these two narrative forward, also to show to investors that there is an opportunity of radical innovations when we see aging connected to the climate change.
How do you think about discrimination in aging? This is a topic that's only started to be talked about publicly, but we're starting to see some real data that suggests that when people in certain economies reach a certain age, getting a job is just getting harder. Keeping a job is harder, and they're being viewed through a lens of being filtered out. It feels like it's a big and emerging issue that's only going to get worse. I'm curious what your research and what your view on this is.
Yeah, so first of all, it's also even worse if you're a woman. It's called literally a double jeopardy. That if you're old and you're a woman, you literally are even more challenged by the discriminations related to age. Now, this discrimination has been coded in 1969 by Professor Butler. It's a very young discrimination. Let me put the quotes around this thing. We haven't solved sexism, racism, but more or less we know what they're about. The understanding there is this discrimination related to age is still very very early. Just look, for example, the classic DNA department inside organization, and typically age is not yet coded as a discrimination by many of them. So this first thing allows already you to understand how far we are to have an understanding of a discrimination related to aging. Hence, how to solve it. It's literally uh, a longer way in the journey. The point is that this discrimination is obviously the discrimination that affects us all. It's so deeply rooted in our cultural background and heritage. We keep on making joke every day about the age, joke that we were not allowed to do anymore about, for example, again, sex or race, which has become something very evident to everybody as such a bad thing. If you just joke about age, nobody says anything because it's just part of our,
Mhm.
fun. Just check out the comics on the newspapers, and this is something, just a silly example of what it's there in the background. Discrimination is very bad from many perspective. From a health perspective is even bad. It's causing literally damages to your cardiovascular system. It's generating effects on the psyche of the people, and the depression related, for example, to discrimination on age is one of the issues that we have to face in the everyday life. Do we see a future, a more positive future? That could be a question. We do, because I think this is becoming a narrative, given the fact that people is getting older, and let me say influential people is getting older. Just make an example. You see probably the photo models of the 80s and the 90s that we all celebrated like icons of beauty, uh, which are now in their late 50s, early 60s, and they both realize how they become a different kind of beauty. And now they are promoting that different kind of beauty, realizing that sometimes maybe they don't get the same contracts from the beauty companies or whatever they could get before when they were younger. Meaning that they realize there is a discrimination, that it's so evident because it's related on the skin type, is related to your wrinkles, that they didn't care about because we're young, and now they're realizing it's a factor of discrimination. It's quite let me say superficial what I'm saying, but I think helps to see there's something is happening, meaning that there are new, let me say, influencers that can start raising the hand, and thanks to their platform of reach, they could probably help accelerate the a better understanding of what is discrimination and how to fight it. I think we're nearby a Me Too movement as well, happening in the overall industries. Obviously, entertainment, beauty, fashion probably would be the first one, but in every office we can feel this discrimination. Hence, there is also a need to push forward, not only for the sake of having better narratives and better products that we need. Literally yesterday, L'Oreal launched a new campaign to fight this discrimination. We contributed as Nika to the strategy of that campaign. Um, but is and it's important that is happening because we can create a wave that can benefit all of us. But also, we should have to do a lot better, a lot more in our everyday life, in our networks, and again, as I was saying before, in the workplace. Which the discrimination is not only dangerous for ourselves as individual, but it's literally harming the business. Organizations are not really taking advantage of the power of knowledge and wisdom, as I was saying before, that we have available, and not making actionable just because there is discrimination. Oh, you're too old to do this thing. That's a classic sentence that we hear every day.
Yeah. So let's expand on that a little bit because a number of episodes ago on this program, we actually had somebody who was on the program to talk about leadership, and it was really focused on the next generation of leaders and what we need to do to get them the skills that they need. And what we talked about in that program was the gap that there used to be a long process of mentorship. You'd have people who were in the executive seats, oftentimes having 5 to 10 year succession plans, identifying some of the great young talent that they knew would take a long time to mature to that senior executive level. There'd have to be some mentoring, some coaching, some knowledge transfer, and just giving them more time in their seats. And that in recent years, because so many of those senior executives stepped away, pursued other things in life, retired, whatever, all of a sudden an entire generation of younger people without the right experience, without the same level of mentorship, were thrust into these roles, and now they're being expected to mentor a generation behind them that they are ill equipped to do that for. Now, that was a conversation in the context of leadership and development of young talent. But do you see that as a big problem for our society as a whole? Governments, nonprofits, businesses, institutions like academic institutions, where mentorship and knowledge from generation to generation was such a core component of keeping the institution going, that if we start losing that piece, we're going to lose part of what makes those places special.
Well, that's a good point. And again, there's been a lot of debate, for example, of the oldest generation leading still the political arena in the United States. Obviously, it's so evident. But that's the first thing we have to sweep out from the discussion. It doesn't mean you're 80 years old, you're not able to do something in a super, let me say, proficient way. Okay, that's one thing, which at the same time should have to allow us to think that you should be also sometimes able to do fantastic performance when you're 17 or 18. The what we were saying before, you are too old to do this job, is also sometimes we hear you're too young to do this job. What is the magic trick here? I completely follow what you're saying. I think I'm personally involved almost every week somehow, from whatever HR department in from whatever organization, to help them understand better how they can maximize this type of interactions between the generations. So this kind of exchange of leadership and knowledge and I would say skills that should happen in a more consistent way in the workplace. It's probably one of the biggest missed opportunity we have today, because there is obviously one elephant in the room, which is the word of retirement, which is forcing some of the government, let me say, global scale, for political reasons and also sometimes economic reasons, to push people to retire earlier. I think it's a phenomenon that probably will disappear quite soon, where we'll be obliged to work for longer because the system can't afford anymore the pensions to serve the people. Hence, there will be potentially situations in which you could be in your office at 75, 78, still, let me say, working full time, and your manager could be 35, or vice versa. You should have to explore how someone in their 80s should have to manage someone in their 18th, and think about what I was saying in the beginning about the societal shift that we're living, the speed, sorry, of the societal shift. Thinks I was going to be someone in 80 years old in 10 years from today, and how diverse and different could be someone in their 18 years old. But it's where we think that we started evolving. And again, I try to bring back what I was saying before. If we go on an idea of, let me say, deleting the concept of generations and starting focusing on the knowledge and the expertise of the people, it's probably where we can start to envision a solution on how we can build a better workplace, better exchange of knowledge, better, let me say, more efficient system of interactions, which are not based on, oh, you're that age, but they're based on, oh, you're good doing that stuff. And I think it's what it's probably we should have to start looking more consistently. All the effort that companies are making to try, to source the skill out of the people, to empower those people, to reskill the people in their process of life, it's sometimes still, let me say, harmed by the fact that it's age the pivot around which you try to do this. And hence, I think it's time that we go also over at quite traditional models in which the reverse mentoring, which is a classic technique in which you try to merge the generation in one organization, sees always the same schema. Oh, the young one good with technology, the old one good with business. Who say that? Moreover, who say that if the older generation that is still working has been exposed to the internet, for example, for 40 years, more or less, like myself? Yes, I'm a boomer, and I think I know quite a lot about tech. Yes, that's been part of my job, but I've been exposed to the changes of tech, and hence I probably have I'm not saying the best possible knowledge, but I've seen application of technology that maybe I suggested to a younger generation as much as a younger generation could suggest me business application of technologies that I thought were framed for that purpose in another way. What I'm trying to say is that it's not you're good with tech because you're young and you're good with business because you're old works. We have to find out what are the triggers that can help source that knowledge and intelligence beyond the stereotypes, which is still the leading narrative. Uh, and the fact that, as you were saying, the risk of having, let me say, a lack of mentorship in the hierarchical flow, I think it's something that we should have to consider wisely. I think that the best source for your growth is literally nearby your desk in whatever office you are, or let me say out of a Zoom window wherever you are, um, because it's that where we can really make a change if we create a good system of interactions between the peers of an organization, something that we should have to think wisely about.
So we talked a lot about technology there. Let's talk about that trend because at the end of the day, the goal for aging is healthy aging, right? And hopefully, a lot of the technological innovations, including the applications of artificial intelligence in healthcare and in other areas of life, can aid in that. As you're going through your research, are you excited about any particular technological innovation that might aid in helping our societies age healthier?
Well, I think we have to think about what makes us healthy. Sorry, I think roughly we have 10% is healthcare per se. I think 22 is genetic, 7% the environment, 30% societal factors, and 25% is behavioral factors. Sorry, I don't know exactly if the percentage at the end will make 100, but more or less as the framing of the pie as the WHO suggested to us. We can discuss about the percentage, but the size of the pie of each slice of the pie is more or less that way, meaning that there's a lot of innovation and I would say investment in the healthcare space. It's a very strong, well designed business model that we know works. Think about the pharma, think about vaccines, think about all the machinery to help us stay healthy once we have got the disease. Because this is what the healthcare system basically does. There's too much a need for curing people that got diseases that there's not enough time, power, money, investors, vision in avoiding those diseases to happen. Meaning that I think the fantastic, amazing, gigantic opportunity for investors and innovators is in prevention. It's very hard because we are missing a business model for prevention. Hence, the innovation in the prevention space is still very weak for many reasons. The first reason is that when you do an action in prevention, maybe you could see the outcome in 5 to 10 years or 20 years. So it's not easy to convince an investor to say, if you just put a penny now, you will get the money in 20 years. say that we know that most of the chronic disease could be avoided. I would say it's a good 80% with the classic pillars of staying healthy. Stay active, eat well, sleep well, stay connected are literally the foundation of how we can live a healthier, longer life. Hence, there's a huge space for innovation there. You see, there's some interesting innovation happening. There's a fantastic application in UK called Zoe, which is well designed in terms of technology, language, narrative, which helps you understand better the process of sugars in your blood and how to maximize your nutrition and exercise that can benefit that curve. It's just, sorry, one of the millions of good stuff. The difference there is that you have you need a good narrative, a good people engagement. I would say it's a good technology per se, that can suggest how we can tackle more or less the healthcare space from the other side instead of treating someone when they got a disease, avoiding that disease to happen. I think that should be the mission of the technologies for aging for the next century. Uh, Theoretically and paradoxically, not needing healthcare. We know that we will need it. Okay, so please do not misunderstand me. But my point is that our mission, our goal should be: we would like net zero. We would like to have healthcare zero. It will ever happen? No, because we're harming ourselves every day. And again, if we also do our best, doing all the possible right things to live healthy, then you're living in a polluted area, and then you could develop diseases that are independent from your, let me say, drive to be as good as you can. That's why we have to consider this dimension together, and that's why there's a huge space for, I would say, good revenues for companies that would like to invest in that space, because it's there where probably we can then create a better economic system, reducing also the cost of healthcare and investing those money in better life for all of us, from transportation to green areas to better homes.
And one of the most perplexing trends to me, and I think my audience, so maybe you can help us make sense of this, is the fact that the planet has never had more individual people on it than it does today. And yet the trend of individual loneliness has never been talked about more than it is today. And we are always told that this intersects with the issue of age. And yet we know from recent research, and in fact, it's many young people who feel isolated and alone in the society. So, how do you and your team and your research approach this topic, which is becoming an important public health topic on top of just a societal issue?
Yeah, so I think you, I would say, very correctly mentioned the fact that there is loneliness and isolation. First of all, two different things, two different phenomenon, and second, they're hitting very hard at the younger generation, probably more than the older ones. The point is that when you're old, you have quote unquote less time to find out a solution to the topic, and it's become again. Like the discrimination of age we mentioned before, a driver to develop diseases. So it's absolutely a pandemic per se that it's happening in our everyday life. It's very hard to solve because it's generated by, let me say, multiple factors. Let me just do one example, which come out from a very interesting session we had a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about what are drivers of longevity in cities. And it came out that schools are one of the better ways to avoid loneliness and isolation. Why? Because when you have children, you always find a way to maybe develop new friends, create literally engagement with people that is completely out of your network, is not in your, let me say, business domain. It doesn't live necessarily nearby your home. It's where you can develop relations. But when you get old and you don't have any more children to pick up at school, you're just literally missing that moment. And if you just start moving in another city or just having a life not necessarily where you were grew up, it's very hard to have new friends. Now that's where we should have to invest a lot of our energy, besides many of the technology we mentioned before, to help people stay connected with others. So I think a very good network of friends and relatives, it's probably one of the most powerful medicine you can start taking along your life to have a healthier, longer life. Let me do one example. In Italy, there's this very interesting data where 75% of people over 70 has a at least one relative or a friend that lives a distance of a mile. Okay, so 1 mile distance for the 70% of 75 years old plus, which tells you a lot about why Italy with Japan is one of the, let me say, oldest country in the world and one of the fastest aging country in the world, but also one of the not necessarily the healthiest, but very close to the top. I think Italy is 8 in healthy life expectancy. The United States are 72. So that's the range that you can envision. And for sure, one of the reasons why in Italy you live longer and in Japan as well, because you have a strong bonding with your social network, family that we always think as a most of the time as a burden is the way on how you can literally grow healthier in your life because you keep the connection around yourself. There is a system of support which is, let me say, bonded inside your everyday life that doesn't necessarily need always the search for more carers. That's how I think we should have to start thinking the development of our own communities in the future. And I think cities plays a great role in keeping us more engaged and connected. Again, in Barcelona, they've done a fantastic work in an entity which is called the Superilles. It's called the super blocks, basically. They completely redesign how the neighborhood works by facilitating through the architecture of the neighborhood the intersection between people living in a crossroad, for example. And it's a so building to building, door to door, people is getting back the space that was previously occupied only by streets, and it's becoming a place for social exchange and connection and proximity of people and services. Not only the services, literally the people is literally a driver for the health of those neighborhoods. I think it's a model that it's replicable, and we should have to look with a lot of attention for how we would like to develop communities in the future.
And what is your research telling us, and what is your institute telling us about the future impact to our economies, whether those are national level, regional level? Because a lot of what we're hearing in the United States these days is people are having to step out of the workforce to take care of their aging parents at the same time they're raising their own kids. They're basically being squeezed out of the ability to work a full time job. And in some cases, they don't have the flexibility with the skills they have for any other job. So it is creating an entire generation of people who are effectively falling behind. And it's terrible for companies because then they're unable to have the kind of workforce that they would normally expect given all other factors in the economy. Are you seeing a similar trend in your research? Are you seeing that in Europe and around the world, or is this more of a Western phenomenon?
No, I think it's something happening, I would say, is almost everywhere. Two things. The first one, what you just say, that confirm one data we have, how much, if we stick to the generations, silent generation and Gen Z are so strongly bonded together. And Biden last election, we know, has been strongly influenced by the support from the Gen Z, which is quite interesting because it's suggesting how much relation has been developed between these two extreme of the generations, because these generations in the middle were busy in trying to bring forward a career or a family, depending where you see the weight. So that the Gen Zs, the younger ones, were connected because they were cared about the older one, and vice versa. Which I think it's an interesting point that we should have to consider when thinking about developing more cohesive community in our perspective. From an economic perspective, if you see the aging demographic and you see the projections in Oxa country in the future, it shows clearly that with an aging demographic, we will lose, let me say, an economic power, GDP power, by 0.8% in the next 30 years. But if you're able to mitigate this type of process of aging with better policies in keeping people more engaged or more in the workplace, this could be reduced to a zero point 0.4 up to a 0.2%, meaning that the risk of having lower salaries and the weight on the overall economy of a country could be again mitigated if we develop policies to design a better society for an aging demographic. Let me keep it as broad as I can. Hence, there is not a mission of staying healthy for the sake of staying healthy. It's also a mission for the growth of our economies. Then you and me, we can discuss if we like it or not, the world in which we're in. If the global world as it's being designed is the right world we would like to live, if all this commercial narrative permanently let me say, floating in our every actions and in every intersection of our life is the main things we should have to care about. But this is the world we live in. Like it or not, I think we also should have to start thinking about how we can fight inequalities through economy and not through intervention coming from a government. That's something that I strongly sustain. We need to develop an economy around longevity and aging because we need to more quickly give access to everybody to treatment or innovations that could literally means their quality of life, their healthy life. It's almost impossible, in my opinion, to wait for governments to make a rain intervention to try to solve problems like loneliness and isolation that hit very hard in some areas of the world. The north of England is one of these. If we are not developing correctly an economic system, it would be impossible, in my opinion, to democratize the access to what others could access to. So again, economic power, as for an individual, as for a family, means also, as we all know well, healthy aging.
And my last question for you on this episode is around looking to the future over the next 5 to 10 years. What are the key trends that you're looking at in this topic? And are you seeing any countries, businesses, groups that are really at the forefront, at the vanguard of trying to address many of the topics that we talked about today?
Yeah, so it's easy to say Singapore as one of these countries, but I try to avoid to say Singapore per se because Singapore is a quite unique case. Yes, they're doing great because they can do it for how the political system is and also the size of that country is, which allows them to deliver policies that probably could be not suitable for other places. So I would say probably countries like Switzerland per se or UK, for example, are doing, in my opinion, quite well in terms of a political perspective. Then the health outcomes is a different story. UK 7 years ago launched their four grand challenges, meaning that they put energy, money, budget, vision, strategy on four pillars: artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles, climate change, and aging. So aging was part of the agenda with the classic other three buzzwords that I mentioned that you find in every economic plan of every country, right? It is interesting that they put aging as one of the topic because I think it helps to understand. First of all, there is something that we should have to do, but not only again in a quite a traditional assistive way, but in a kind of a business way, where business means developing system, sustainable system that can generate a return on society, not on investment only. Hence, I think there are countries like the one I mentioned that we should have to keep an eye on. Then, is it a bed of roses? It's not, because it's very complicated from many perspectives. Because a priority in society, and for example, here in UK, Brexit obviously has become a counter priority somehow. That generated a lot of complications in how you could achieve those goals in the previous, let me say, ecosystem. From a technological or innovation perspective, we didn't even touch the word AI before you put it in the discussion. I tried not to go immediately there, but obviously, what machine learning allow us to do today, and thanks also to the computing capacity we have that we didn't have 10 years ago. So it's not only artificial intelligence per se, is that we have machines that can process those data. I think it's going to help us in many areas. And if I would pick one, I would say is in understanding better who we are. It's quite crazy that we know we can receive whatever we want in our home in 1 hour, even less, and thinking that we still have things that are being designed for all of us. What I'm trying to say is that we have a technology so innovative, so fast, so I would say precise about serving us when we need something. Amazon obviously is the classic example, but still we have everything designed in general for all of us. I think that we can develop the same logic that we could have hyper customized a solution for who we are as humans as potentially one of the outcome of the future, so that the things that I will use or I will interact with are designed for me as myself. It will also help to respect, I would say, is better our privacy, because it will be somehow in our control to tell as much as we want about who we are to whoever we want, because they can serve the things that we want and desire, not necessarily we someone think we need. So I think it's a combination of these factors: a better understanding of who we are thanks to technology, but also allowing at the same time using the same technologies. Blockchain is one of those, to have a better control of our data for the sake of being better served. Okay, so I think that's let me say broad lens that could stand bottom to many of the innovations that we discussed today, from hyper specialized drugs explicitly designed for our metabolism, to objects that could have the shape of my hand instead of a shape of a generic hand.
It's a very optimistic future, and we look forward to it. It's been a fascinating hour. Thank you for joining us. If folks would like to learn more about you or the organization that you lead, where can they find that information?
Yeah, so they can find it at www.uknica.co.uk. Nica stands for NICA. And you can find me online on LinkedIn. My name is Nick Palmarini. You will find me there. Happy to connect with you guys.
And we will put those links in the description of this podcast, as well as on my website and our social media posts for this episode. Nick, thank you so much for joining us.
Was been a fantastic hour. Thank you so much for your interest on the topic.
Fascinating conversation with Nick Palmarini. Very grateful that he took so much time to cover so much ground with us. I'll just plug one more time his book, Live Longer with AI. I've got a link to it in the description of this program. It's also on my website, brianjmatos.com. The book explores emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, but others as well, that are helping us to start regarding health as our great personal and societal asset to protect, and how we can and should begin to focus on that. So the book again is Live Longer with AI, and Nick Palmarini, one of the co-authors of that. Uh, you can subscribe to this program on Spotify, on Google Podcasts, on Apple Podcasts, on Amazon Music, the Odyssey app, the iHeartRadio app, and pretty much anywhere that you get your podcasts. This show is available. You can subscribe for free, and you can also check out my website, brianjmatos.com. You can follow me on any of your favorite social media channels, and I post clips of programs like this, preview clips, to YouTube. You can find me by just searching Brian J. Matos Show on YouTube. Coming up on our next episode, we will be joined by Romit Bandari. He is a lecturer at the law school at the University of Essex in the United Kingdom. He's also the author of Human Rights and the Revision of Refugee Law. The topic next week is a sobering one. It's a tough one, but it's a very important one because it is a trend, unfortunately, that is gripping many parts of the world, and that is the issue of forced migration. We're going to talk about asylum laws and norms and the history thereof. We're going to talk about refugee status, refugee laws, refugee issues, and all of the different related topics that intersect on the topic of people moving across international borders. This is complicated, and part of the reason that I asked a senior lecturer to come and join this program is because I think all of us need to be better educated on this. And so I hope that you'll join me for that education and conversation in our next episode. And again, you can find all of our episodes on any of your favorite podcast platforms. Download, subscribe, and share so that we can continue to grow our community of curious minds. As always, I thank you all for listening. Look forward to talking to you again in our next episode, and I hope you will all remain and stay curious.